out of you will come for me one whose origins are from of old, from ancient times. Therefore, Israel will be abandoned until the time when she who is in labor gives birth, and the rest of his brothers return to join the Israelites. He will stand and shepherd his flock in the strength of the Lord, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God. And they will live securely, for then his greatness will reach to the ends of the earth, and he will be their peace.
This is how the birth of Jesus Christ came about. His mother, Mary, was pledged to be married to Joseph. Came together, she was found to be with child through the Holy Spirit. The virgin will be with child and will give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us.
When Joseph woke up, he did what the angel of the Lord had commanded him and took Mary home as his wife. But he had no union with her until she gave birth to a son, and he gave him the name Jesus. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Christ was to be born. "In Bethlehem, in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet had written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler who will be the shepherd of my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and make a careful search for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him." After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen in the east went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold and of incense and of myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route.
Well, let me add my welcome to Chris's. It's great to see you here with us this evening. My name is Steve. I'm one of the staff team here at All Saints. Yesterday, I enjoyed a breakfast with a group of chaps at Wetherspoons. Actually, I'm not sure I did enjoy it. I don't know what others found, but it was cold, mine, so I'm not sure I did enjoy it. But exercise on them. And the exercise was I asked them what comes to mind when I say the word Christmas. You probably played that kind of word association game. Do it now in your heads. Don't call out. You've got a word. So these are the words that the guys came up with: twinkling lights, tree, pudding, stocking, bells, lunch, presents. Odd, really, because blokes never buy presents, do they? Really? Mistletoe, carols, people, shopping, Father Christmas, reindeer, Christmas songs. In fact, another chap in the pub called out specifically Blue Christmas by Elvis. He sort of joined in the game. Now, I'm not quite sure what to make of the fact that despite the group being about 60% chaps who would say they're Christians, only one of them said Jesus. Perhaps given that I'm their pastor, it's got to raise a few questions at my next annual review, really, hasn't it? Anyway, that was our list. But I wonder, if we look at the historical sequence of events, if we started with Matthew's accounts of events that we just heard a little bit of, that Andy and Joe read, started, if you like, with a clean sheet of paper, I wonder if we'd write those words. I wonder what words you came up with as I said Christmas. I say that because I don't know if you noticed, but the kind of warm, fuzzy, cutesy, cosy imagery probably isn't what would spring to mind, is it? If you had that account in front of you. Probably not. Now, I'm not trying to spoil any of that kind of heartwarming stuff, the reasons that you're here today for the candles, the carols, the tradition. I'm really not. The twinkle of the Christmas lights. We're here, aren't we, for that kind of cosy, heartwarming stuff, of course. Genuinely not trying to ruin that. But actually, to see why it's such a celebration that those words, if you like, capture, we have to take an honest look at these events. Because there's some messy stuff in there. The real nativity actually isn't that suitable for children, if you look at it. The real nativity is gritty. The real nativity, maybe think twice about making it into a play for kids to do at primary school. We're going to see a little bit more in the next reading. It's definitely Certificate 18, just based on the violence alone that we're going to hear about. So what have we had so far? It's been familiar, hasn't it? Engaged young couple, the happy couple, Mary and Joseph. We've had the angel, the virgin birth, the wise men, the magi visits. It's all good Christmas card material, isn't it? You can see it on the front of the cards, the traditional cards. And of course, we've all played probably the giraffe in the nativity play, haven't we? We know the story quite well. Familiar stuff. But I wonder, did you spot the slightly awkward bit? A surprise as Matthew tells it. It's a little bit at odds at the idea of Christmas being all comfy, cosy and nice. Let's walk through the scene, see what you think. So firstly, Matthew wastes no time. Opening scene, awkward situation. Mary engaged to Joseph, she's pregnant, and it's not Joseph's. Now, this isn't the result of a drunken hen night. That's not it. Not because she's been unfaithful to Joseph. She's a virgin. It's God himself intervening. Now, that ought to surprise us, of course, but that's not, I don't think, the biggest surprise in this account. Next, Matthew makes it clear that Joseph is actually one of the good guys, isn't he? I don't know if you noticed, he must have been heartbroken to hear that. Absolutely heartbroken. This young man, engaged to be married, finds out that his fiancée is pregnant. Surely the only reasonable conclusion, she's cheated on him. An emotional bombshell, surely, for Joseph. Would you believe Mary if you were stood in his sandals? Think of the agony for Mary too. She knows she's not cheated. But who'd believe her story of how she's pregnant? Equally agonising for her. Agonising emotional trauma. So Matthew points us to Joseph's response. No fit of rage, no explosion of anger, no sulking. The marriage can't go ahead. But Joseph doesn't want Mary suffering, so a discreet breakup to protect her. How he behaves, undoubtedly, that would intensify Mary's upset, wouldn't it? That sense of injustice. Clearly, this Joseph, he's a decent chap, actually. Definitely a keeper. I wonder if you've ever thought about that aspect to Christmas. We skip over this emotional bombshell, give it a kind of tinsel wash, don't we? Wouldn't be very Christmassy otherwise, maybe. Again, it ought to surprise us. Events around Jesus' birth, emotionally, a roller coaster for Mary and Joseph. But that too, I don't think is the biggest surprise. If a pregnant fiancée isn't enough of a shock, Joseph gets a message from God. Now, better than a WhatsApp, God sends an angel. Now, that is not an everyday event, is it? Anyone seen an angel? Chaps, you should be pointing to the lady you're sat in. Anyway, never mind. If an angel appeared at the end of my bed, I'd probably take notice. So Joseph, like us, can't ignore it. Straightforward message. Says, Joseph, son of David, don't be afraid to take Mary home as your wife, because what's conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She'll give birth to a son, and you're to give him the name Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins. Joseph finds out how come Mary's pregnant, and the angel saves him and Mary that lengthy process of choosing the baby's name. That can be quite painful, can't it? But even more surprise, he not only gets the who, do you notice he gets the why? Just spot that? He gets his son's future too. Now, I don't know, if we were ranking surprises in this Christmas story, surely that is quite big, isn't it? The biggest surprise is the answer to the why of Jesus. Saving people from their sins. That is not very Christmassy, is it? Some might argue that Christmas is all about sort of, small sins, overindulgence, overspending, overdrinking, hangovers, that kind of thing. In fact, Matthew can't just let it go with that bit. He will save his people from their sins, and he adds a little bit of extra explanation. All this took place to fulfill what the Lord had said through the prophet. That was actually our first reading, the Micah reading. The virgin will be with child and will give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. See, Matthew wants us to notice, much more significant than an ordinary baby being born, history all pointing to the birth of Jesus. What the angel tells Joseph about this particular child, Matthew really wants us to notice. This is no ordinary birth announcement. And if they go with the angel, it's an odd one, isn't it? Mary and Joseph, pleased to announce the birth of their son, Jesus, born 25th of December, £6.10. I don't know if that's true, I made that up. And then you get his job title added to the bottom. There'd be some unusually pushy parents, wouldn't it, to include that. Their little darling's career mapped out on the birth announcement. But the angel is clear from the outset. No missing the reason God came to be among us. Saving his people from their sins. That actually fast forwards us from Jesus' birth all the way to his death on the cross. We go from the first Christmas to the first Easter, and we're only in chapter 1 of Matthew. The shock of Christmas is that actually it's all about Easter, really. Matthew wants this to be our take home, that Christmas is about God coming as Jesus to save you from your sin. Now you can see we need to come back to get our heads around this, and we will be doing that in episode 2 after our next reading. It's going to be a bit like the Megflix drama this week on the TV, slow release. We're going to stand and sing again as the band lead us.
When they had gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. "Get up," he said. "Take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him." So he got up, took the child and his mother during the night, and left for Egypt, where he stayed until the death of Herod. And so was fulfilled what the Lord had said through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I called my son." When Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious, and he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. Then what was said through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. "A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more."
So let's look at the scenes again. We're not really sure who these Magi, wise men or kings were. Whoever they were, they've rocked up in Jerusalem, the royal court. And there they are, they're telling King Herod, who thought star in the east, and Herod's own advisors confirm his worst fears. There's a far more significant king born than him. Herod's experts know their stuff. They know that this Christ is this much anticipated king, the one they've been waiting for. Bad news for Herod. This is all as it was foretold by the prophets hundreds of years earlier. So, in true Blackadder style, Herod comes up with a cunning plan. Go and make a careful search for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I too may go and worship him. Yeah, right, Herod, of course you're going to. Doubtful anyone believed his motives, did they? Now, we don't know if the Magi saw through his spin. Matthew doesn't tell us. Whatever, they get straight back onto their celestial sat-nav, and they've arrived at their destination, Bethlehem. And the narrative, well, it does take a more Christmassy turn at that point, doesn't it? You know, there's the gifts, the gold, frankincense, and myrrh. I don't know if that's something you're hoping for this Christmas, maybe more of an iPhone or something like that, but that was expensive stuff. They're gifts fit for a king, and they worship Jesus. And it's the Magi now, with a message from God, that gets them back home safely. It's a reroute, avoiding Jerusalem, not because of traffic, but of course to avoid the evil intentions of Herod. And so we get to our final scene of the narrative. Herod, of course, is going to be furious that he's been outwitted. Furious his cunning plan has unravelled because the Magi didn't get back to him. So Matthew takes us back to Joseph at that point. Magi have left. Joseph is just tidying up a bit. He's loaded the dishwasher. He's put the bins out. He's heading up to bed. And behold, divine messaging service kicks in again. This time, not such a great message. Get up, take the child and his mother, and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you why. For Herod is going to search for the child to kill him. What would you do if you had a message from God like that? You're not going to hang around to check, are you? Joseph loves his wife, loves his adopted son. I'd have thought he'd be on the next EasyJet to Egypt, wouldn't he? Praying for no border force strikes or something like that. Meanwhile, back in Bethlehem, Herod takes the whole thing to another horrendous level. Did you spot that? When Herod realised he'd been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious, and he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under. Well, those are the events. That's the history. Matthew's not recorded that to make for a good nativity play for kids. The things he tells us about what's going on, the why of God for us, saving people from their sin, that has got to be too serious, hasn't it, to just be for children. It has to be for all of us, for you and me too. And then along with that, Matthew signals, even at this stage in Jesus' life, remember he's just between a baby and a toddler, even around his birth, Matthew shows us that Jesus polarizes people. Two complete opposite reactions. Have you spotted that? Jesus has done that since the beginning. He's probably doing it here, right now. It'll be happening even in this room. Perhaps you're here just for the carol singing or the candles or the tradition. Maybe rarely give a thought to Jesus. Finding me talking like this just a little bit annoying. You just want to get back to the songs. Or perhaps for others, actually Jesus is a big part of your life. Every bit a central aspect. See, there'll be two responses to Jesus. On the one hand, Herod's not happy about Jesus, so he goes for mass genocide of all boys 2 years and younger with a Bethlehem postcode. Now, we just need to take a breather here, don't we? When we played that word association game, what imagery does Christmas convey to us? Do you remember I struggled to get Jesus on the list? Would have been a bit of a shock if someone had said to me, genocide, wouldn't it? If they had put that on the list. Can you imagine if it was Putin's Christmas plans for Ukraine next week? Pretty certain that would trigger the involvement of the rest of the world in that war, wouldn't it? The real nativity story, you see, unsanitized, is not a play for kids, is it? Herod's response to Jesus then, utter contempt. Then on the other hand, we have the Magi's response, the polar opposite to Herod. These guys, they have been en route for years. I guess because Herod picked 2 years and under, that was probably the length of time they'd been travelling. They had left everything to find Jesus. They brought the most expensive gifts possible. Incredible dedication to Jesus. Do you see how Matthew doesn't really leave us a lot of wriggle room, does he? There's no grey area. Signals only two extremes. Matthew has two positions. You're either totally dedicated, he's saying, or you're totally opposed. The trouble is that is just not very British, is it, to have such extremes? We love a middle ground fudge, don't we, to be British? Certainly if you're Church of England, that works well, a nice comfy middle ground. No, well, I'd not say I'm religious, but my aunt is a church warden, you know, kind of thing. No, Matthew says that's no good at all. No good at all. Matthew puts these two responses side by side, and he's saying to us, isn't he, which camp are you in? He's asking, Herod or Magi, which is it? He's asking us, his readers, how do you respond to Jesus? Christmas, how do you respond? So for Herod, clearly it's utter contempt. Institutes genocide. Doubtful that that's any of us. So despite my observation that there's no grey areas, no middle ground, I'm about to slightly soften it for us. Can we put it down as passive contempt? You know, a softer version of Herod. So it's passive. But given the two choices Matthew gives us, it's not like the Magi, is it? If we're ignoring Jesus, it does amount to the same, says Matthew. Or there's the Magi's response, joyful realization. Ian, there we go, thank you. Realization that Jesus, not like the thousands of other kids born that day, realization that that is God with us. That is where the joy comes from. See, which of these two we're in all hangs on that big surprise of Christmas. We need to go back to that. Because that's the only way we'll understand why joyful realization is actually the only logical response to Jesus. And it all swings around this why question of Jesus. The angel says she will give birth to a son, and you're to give him the name Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins. Firstly, that does sound a bit negative, doesn't it? Talk of sins, isn't Christmas about celebration? Do we want to be talking about sin, the birth of Jesus, the Son of God on earth, and we go spoiling it by talking about sins? What's the angel doing that for? Not very Christmassy, we might say. We're going to need to look at this just a little bit. The problem with this why of Jesus is that none of us like the implication, do we? The implication that we're not good people. I guess most of us like to think that we are basically good people. You know, we are the proverbial help the old lady across the road people, aren't we? Or push the car stuck in the snow last Sunday, or the slush, or whatever it is. Surely that's us, isn't it? We're not villains. Villains don't go to candlelit carol services after all, do they? Wouldn't be here. Surely not sinners. We're good people, aren't we? Well, let me just try this on you for a moment. Imagine that I've got on the screen here a slideshow of your life. And with my clicker that isn't really working very well, I can click through every day. any moment I like. So up for everyone in the room here to see would be your life, my life, okay? Imagine it can show a snapshot of the things going on inside our heads. Your thoughts about me right now, for example, your desires, things we've said to people, nothing hidden, every detail. Now, let me just say, first of all, I'm sure there'd be lots we'd all be very impressed with. Achievements, kindnesses we've shown, lovely thoughts we've had. Hopefully, lots to celebrate. But if it really is everything up there on the screen, well, that gets a little bit more awkward, doesn't it? If it was my life up there, there'd be plenty of slides I'd want to click past very quickly. Which of your slides wouldn't you want people to see? Don't we all have slides that we'd want to skip? It's awkward because our thoughts, our behaviours, they reveal our true selves so often, don't they? What's going on in our heart. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying we're all tyrants. But if we're honest, neither are any of us sinless, are we? Look behind all of this into our hearts, and it doesn't take a genius to see the effects of this in all areas of human life, from the small scale, in our own families, the Christmas squabbles, the relationship breakdowns, even that current Netflix airing of the Sussexes versus the Windsors. At its heart, is there any difference between what's driving Herod in this text and what's driving Vlad the Bad with his intentions in Ukraine? See, human nature doesn't change a lot, does it? And it's why Matthew doesn't want us missing this point. Born in Bethlehem that Christmas morning was the solution to the single biggest problem that all of humankind faces. What to do about ourselves. You are to give him the name Jesus because he will save his people from their sins. It's why the Magi celebrate. It's why Christmas and Christians, it is about celebration, the birth of Jesus. It is good news. In a stable, in an animal's feeding trough, laid the solution to humankind's biggest issue. But here's the thing. God doesn't force Jesus on you and me. Matthew couldn't be clearer. Two responses to Jesus. The angel actually said he will save his people from their sins. Sorry, I'll go back. Thank you, Ian. I think you advanced it for me. He will save his people from their sins. Those who want to be saved by Jesus. This is an opt-in arrangement. God on earth to save his people from their sins. Herod clearly opted out. Herod clearly opted out. So the Magi clearly opted in. Friends, there's no grey area, no fence to sit on. Now, I love it that you're here today. Some of you come every year, and year on the door, you say to me that you really need to give this some serious thought. Absolutely. Totally you do. What do you think Matthew might say to you? Might he say, yeah, how's that going? How's it going? In a politer moment, might he say, look, I've shown you there's only two responses to Christmas. Please don't get comfortable thinking that there's a fence to sit on.